Hey guys, today's story is a little different. Imagine a sun-drenched afternoon in late spring, laughter bouncing between tent poles and linen-covered tables, kids darting through the yard, and champagne flutes glinting like they belonged in someone else's memory. We were at my family's estate where legacy was currency and silence bought you favor. And just when I thought I'd made peace with being the black sheep, my father raised his glass, looked over the crowd of siblings, cousins, and family friends, and said, "I'm proud of everyone here except the loser. My name is Eli Mercer, I'm 39, a high school counselor and single father. I was never the legacy child, never the trophy." But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd spent the last decade raising a child my father pretended didn't exist. And if you think karma's slow, wait until you hear this. So, before you get pulled in, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually believe that betrayal always comes back around. Drop a comment, where are you watching from, and have you ever had someone you loved make you feel invisible? Now sit back, let the room go quiet, and let me tell you how it really went down. The invitation came printed in gold foil, addressed formally like we were still in the kind of family where image mattered more than honesty. Mercer Family Legacy Reunion. It sounded more like a brand summit than a gathering of people who shared blood. My first instinct was to toss it, but then I saw the postscript. All branches of the family expected. All branches. I wasn't stupid. That meant me. The forgotten branch. The one no one watered anymore. But I didn't burn the card. I didn't decline. Instead, I circled the date, tucked it into my drawer, and let it sit like a slow burn waiting to turn into something. I hadn't stepped foot on the estate in nearly 7 years. Last time I did, it was for my mom's funeral, and even then, Dad barely spoke to me. Just nodded once like we were acquaintances, not father and son. My brother Thomas got the eulogy. My sister Marianne arranged the catering. I stood in the back, next to a tree I used to climb when I was 10, and listened to them rewrite our family history like I'd never been part of it. That was the Mercer way. If you didn't fit, you were edited out like a bad draft. But things were different now. Very different. Because I wasn't coming alone. I packed light. I always did. Button-up shirt, black slacks, and one photo I knew I'd be keeping in my jacket until the moment was right. The estate looked almost the same when I pulled into the gravel lot. White columns, sweeping porch, the scent of trimmed hedges and wealth. The kind of place that never really felt like home, just a set piece for a life I wasn't cast in. People didn't notice me at first, and that suited me fine. I sipped my drink, nodded at a few distant relatives who gave me polite but puzzled looks. Wasn't he the counselor? Didn't he move to Wisconsin? What happened to his job at the university? Small talk danced around me like insects. But I wasn't here for pleasantries. I was here because this time, I wasn't the same Eli they remembered. I was here with a story they didn't know they were part of. Then came the toast. It was just after the salmon course, the sun low and golden. My father stood, commanding the attention of everyone like he always had. 70 years old, trim, still strong-voiced, and sharp-jawed. A man who lived like his words were policy, and his silence was punishment. He tapped the edge of his glass with a fork and smiled, the kind of smile that meant something cutting was about to follow. "I just want to say how proud I am," he began, eyes sweeping the table. "Proud of Thomas for the expansion into Europe. Of Marianne for her law award. Of the grandkids for their scholarships. You're all doing us proud, keeping the Mercer name alive." He paused. I braced. "And of course I'm proud of everyone here except the loser." He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. The table erupted into awkward laughter, some shocked, some complicit. My face stayed still. Years ago, I would have excused myself, maybe slipped out through the back gate and driven home hollow. But not today. Because I knew something he didn't. And I was waiting for the perfect moment to show him. The rest of the evening felt like walking through smoke. Faces blurred. Voices echoed. Some cousins gave me sheepish pats on the shoulder, trying to offer comfort without losing their place in the pecking order. My brother avoided my eyes. Marianne made a vague joke about Dad just being Dad, like cruelty was a family heirloom. But I held my ground. Because I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. They didn't know I'd brought the one person who mattered more than their legacy. The one person who turned everything they believed into a lie. The one child my father never counted. But I did. From day one. And soon, the world would know it too. I stepped away from the table, my footsteps nearly silent on the manicured grass, as laughter trailed behind me like smoke from a fire I no longer felt part of. The garden stretched out in soft shadows, and fireflies blinked lazily near the hedges. I stood near the edge, where the patio lights couldn't reach, and just breathed. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle, and something else, something sharper. Memory, maybe? Or anger aging into something more refined. I wasn't hiding. I was preparing. You don't charge into a moment like this with your fists raised, you enter it like a surgeon. Precise. Calm. Ready to cut just enough to change the shape of what came before. They didn't know about Ava. Not really. And it wasn't because I was ashamed. I wasn't hiding her. I was protecting her. From them. From the same people who had made it clear years ago that loyalty in this family was conditional. That blood might run deep, but it ran cold, and only in one direction. When I told them I was keeping the baby, my father didn't yell or curse. He just disconnected. Like flipping a switch. One day I was his son, and the next, I was a stranger who'd made an unforgivable choice. My crime? Choosing love over legacy. Responsibility over respectability. I was 25 then, broke and terrified, working nights at a counseling clinic, drinking burnt coffee just to stay awake. Maria, Ava's mother, had made her decision and didn't look back. But I did. Every single day, I looked back and chose Ava. Not because it was easy. God, no. There were nights I thought the floor might collapse under the weight of it all. But when I held her, when she looked up at me with those storm-colored eyes, I knew I wasn't raising a child, I was building a life. No one in my family asked about her. Not once. Not on birthdays. Not when she was hospitalized at 6 with pneumonia. Not when she won her regional science competition at 10. I sent one picture to my mother years ago. No reply. So I stopped trying. I didn't need their approval, and Ava didn't need their name. We created our own rhythm. Morning serial debates about comic books. Evening walks with her sketchpad in one hand and mine in the other. I watched her become more than I ever thought I could raise, sharp, compassionate, witty beyond her years. Her middle school principal once told me she was the kind of kid who made the room smarter just by walking in. I didn't tell him she also made my life matter. And now she was 14. And today was the day she'd walk into the world that tried to erase her and leave a mark it couldn't ignore. Back inside, the reunion had hit its stride. Dessert was being served, laughter flowing again. I moved back to the table, my expression unreadable. My father was telling some inflated story about a business negotiation from the 80s. Everyone leaned in, nodding, smiling, sipping champagne like it tasted like legacy instead of loss. I slid into my seat and watched. I waited until his voice dipped, until forks clinked gently against china and eyes turned toward me out of habit, confusion, maybe even discomfort. Then I stood. The quiet hit like a ripple in still water. At first just a couple heads turned. Then more. And finally, every gaze locked on me like I'd stood on stage uninvited. I didn't clear my throat. I didn't smile. I just held up the folder. Plain manila, but dense. Heavy with a different kind of proof. Most of you haven't heard from me in years, I began, my voice low, measured. And I haven't come to explain or apologize. I came to introduce. Their eyes flicked between me and the folder. I could see my father already retreating behind that practiced stillness, the same mask he wore when he signed contracts or severed ties. I left because I chose a different path. I continued. I chose someone you never cared to know. A girl. A daughter. My daughter. That got them. The room leaned collectively, like a single body adjusting to an unexpected blow. She's 14 now. Smarter than anyone in this room ever gave me credit for raising. Independent. Proud. And more Mercer than you'll ever be because she didn't inherit the name. She earned the strength. I opened the folder, laying out photos, certificates, hand-drawn birthday cards, science medals. Pages of a life lived without them. And she's here. There was a shuffle behind me. The sound of sneakers on stone. The garden gate clicked open, and she appeared, jeans, hoodie, hair tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail. In her hands, an envelope. In her eyes, steel and fire. She walked straight to the table. She didn't look around. She looked through. Through the silence, the discomfort, the judgment. This, I said, is Ava. The child you refused to see. The granddaughter you forgot to love. My father froze. No words. Just a slow unclenching of his jaw as he stared at her like she'd appeared from smoke. Ava placed the envelope in front of him. She didn't say much. Just one line. Quiet, but sharp enough to cut. Happy reunion. Then she turned and walked back to me, as calm as if she just handed over a birthday card. We left in silence. Not because we were dismissed, but because we were done. What needed to be said had been said. Not for applause, not for forgiveness, just for truth. And in that quiet, I realized something. I hadn't just introduced my daughter to them. I'd introduced myself. The man they cast aside who built something better. I didn't say much on the drive back. Ava sat beside me, her earbuds in, one foot resting on the dashboard the way she always did when she felt something and didn't want to talk about it yet. The city lights glided past the windshield in gold streaks, and for a long stretch, we said nothing. But silence wasn't absence with us, it was our shared space, our signal that words could wait. She pulled one earbud out eventually, and glanced at me. You okay? She asked. I nodded once. You. Fine, she said. Actually kind of proud. I didn't know if she meant of herself or me or both. Either way, it was enough. I reached over and squeezed her shoulder, and we kept driving. That night, when she was asleep and the apartment was still, I stood by her door and just watched her breathe. For all the venom I'd absorbed from my family over the years, for the labels they gave me, for the silence they offered her, none of it stuck. They didn't break us. And I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I used to be. What I felt now was colder, more focused. I wasn't interested in punishment. I was interested in truth. Ava had shown them her face, and they flinched. That was their shame, not ours. The next morning, my inbox was full. A message from my mother. I had no idea. I wish you had told us. From my brother. You blindsided everyone. That wasn't cool. And from my father, just a single sentence. Was that supposed to hurt me? I didn't reply. They didn't deserve my words anymore. They'd had 14 years to ask a question, send a letter, show an ounce of curiosity. What they deserved now was silence. But fate wasn't done. 1 week later, my cousin Megan called to tell me the family wanted to invite Ava to the annual foundation dinner. She made an impression, Megan said. People want to meet her properly. Like an exhibit? I asked. No. Like a legacy. That word hit a nerve. Legacy. It was the thing my father worshipped. The one story he thought he could write alone. His sons, his business, his donations. But Ava had cracked that narrative open, and now they wanted to stitch her into it like a patch on a coat they tore years ago. I said no. At first, they pushed back. My mother called and insisted it was a gesture of goodwill. My brother offered to pick her up himself. I asked Ava what she thought. She shrugged. Do they really want me there, or do they want to look like they care? She was 14, but she saw through more masks than I did at 30. I don't need their approval, she added. I already know who I am. And that was that. I sent a single response. She's not interested. The fallout was predictable. Passive-aggressive texts. Gossip from distant relatives. A forwarded email thread where my father referred to Ava as a PR storm we didn't see coming. That phrase stuck with me. PR storm. As if she were a mistake to spin away, not a girl with a soul and a voice. That's when I decided it wasn't enough to walk away. I needed to redefine the ending. Not for revenge. For clarity. For her. So I started writing. A full memoir. Not of pain, but of parenting. A private collection of essays and letters, one for every year of her life. Photos. Notes. Voice memos. Little pieces of us. Of nights spent building science fair volcanoes and Saturday morning pancakes. Of her first heartbreak and her first victory. A record of a life lived beyond their gaze. I didn't write it for publishing. I wrote it for Ava. A future gift. Something she could hold and say, "This is who raised me." Not their silence. His presence. Meanwhile, Ava began painting more. She'd always liked sketching, but now she was mixing mediums: charcoal, watercolor, even digital. Her subjects weren't always cheerful. Some were haunting. Stark portraits of faceless people in suits. Of trees with roots growing into shackles. One, in particular, was just a chair in a spotlight, surrounded by shadows. I asked her what it meant. "It's the seat at the table they never gave me," she said. That one made me cry, privately, in the kitchen later. Because she wasn't bitter, just brilliant. She didn't need their invitation. She'd already built her own gallery. By the time spring came around, we'd moved into a new place. Nothing extravagant, but brighter, more open. She had a room with north-facing windows for her art. I had space for a home office. It was a quiet reset. One morning, she came downstairs in a blazer one she'd thrifted and altered herself and asked me how she looked. "Like a woman who knows exactly where she's going," I said. She smirked. "Good. Because I've got a presentation to win." It was a district-wide pitch competition for young entrepreneurs. She walked in with her concept, a mentorship app for kids of single parents. She called it Anchor. It won first place. And guess who showed up at the awards ceremony? Megan. And beside her, my father. He didn't speak. Didn't even try to make eye contact. Just stood there with that rigid stance, arms crossed, watching Ava accept her award with a composure that outclassed the room. Afterward, she glanced his way, then at me. "I don't need a grandfather," she whispered. "I've always had a father." We left without saying a word. But in that moment, I knew the war was over. Not because we destroyed them, but because we outgrew them. The calls started coming less frequently after that. At first, it was silence masquerading as patience. They assumed we'd cave, that Ava would get curious, or that I'd get nostalgic enough to extend a branch. But time has a funny way of clarifying things. Silence didn't feel cold anymore. It felt clean. And once we stopped expecting them to reach out with warmth, their absence stopped feeling like punishment. But then came the letter. It was hand-delivered, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Me mother's. The envelope was thick, textured like she always preferred, like the kind she used to send out for family Christmas cards no one ever looked forward to. I opened it carefully, not out of sentimentality, but caution. Inside were three things: a folded letter, a photograph, and a check. The photo was old, taken at some charity event. Ava wasn't in it. I wasn't in it. Just my father, my mother, and my two brothers, all raising champagne flutes. The caption on the back read, "Legacy." The check was made out to Ava. $10,000. Memo line. For her future. And then the letter. Pages of it. A meandering apology without form. My mother explained that she'd never known how to connect with girls, that Ava reminded her too much of things she didn't understand. She blamed herself, sort of, but only to excuse the family's behavior. She said no, urged that we let bygones be bygones, and come to the annual foundation gala. Said Ava could accept a scholarship award in front of the board. That she'd be proud. Proud. That word had lost all weight in their mouths. I didn't show Ava the check. I didn't need to. Instead, I returned it all. I printed one of Ava's recent digital paintings, a grayscale piece of a staircase spiraling into the sky with no visible end, and mailed it back in the same envelope. No words. No caption. Just art. Because if they didn't hear her voice, they didn't deserve mine. Around that time, Ava began talking about college. She'd been offered early acceptance to 2 state schools and had already drafted her portfolio for a visual arts program out west. I never pushed her one way or another. I wanted her decision to feel like hers and no one else's. She chose the one with the smaller name, but the better studio space. I don't care about famous, she told me. I care about free. That line stuck with me. So, I started preparing too. I transitioned to remote work, downsized even more, sold off the last few heirlooms from my parents' home I'd kept in boxes, the kind of things people hold onto just because they were told they mattered. And then something unexpected happened. Ava's art got featured. An online gallery stumbled upon her work through a youth showcase and featured 5 of her pieces. She didn't even know until her inbox exploded with inquiries. Buyers. Interview requests. A short-form documentary producer asked if she'd be willing to tell her story. At dinner that night, she slid her phone across the table and raised an eyebrow. You think I should say yes? I looked her in the eye. Only if you're ready for them to hear it. She thought for a beat, then smiled. Good. Because I already said yes. I wasn't worried about how she'd come across. She had clarity I didn't even find until my 30s. She spoke plainly, with warmth and distance at the same time. In the interview she said, I wasn't raised in spite of rejection, I was raised because of presence. They asked her who that presence was. She simply said, my dad. That interview went viral. Not explosive numbers, but enough to get passed around in the same circles my family's foundation operated in. Enough that within a week, my father reached out, not through a letter this time, but through a lawyer. A cease and desist. Claimed we were defaming the family name. I laughed when I read it. Ava was furious. I didn't even say anything about them, she snapped. I just told the truth. I nodded. And that's what scares them. I didn't respond to the lawyer. I didn't have to. The video was protected, the gallery stood behind her, and truth, as it turns out, doesn't breach contracts. It breaks illusions. The very next week, I received a notice that my name had been removed from the family trust. The last remnants of inheritance gone. Just like that. Ava looked at me that night across the dinner table and said, Do you feel lighter? I did. Because that money was never mine. It was just bait disguised as bloodline. So I watched her keep building one canvas at a time, one exhibit at a time. I never gave her a throne or a title or a spotlight. I gave her a floor and told her to build up. And she did. And every time she spoke, she didn't just share her past, she rewrote it. The gallery that first featured Ava invited her to speak at their annual winter exhibit. I own a quiet but deeply respected affair in the city. They wanted her to open the weekend with a talk titled, The Art of Becoming, centered on youth, isolation, and vision. She was only 19. But when she stood under those pendant lights in that clean, white space, she owned the air like she'd been born under spotlights. I sat in the back, my coat still buttoned, not because I was cold, but because I needed something to hold myself together. She didn't script it. She never does. She spoke about growing up feeling like a background character in her own family. How her drawings started in the margins of report cards and napkins at restaurants where no one looked down far enough to see them. She talked about how some people don't raise you to be someone, they raise you not to outshine someone else. That line made the room go still. I looked around, saw heads nodding, one woman wiping her cheek. Then Ava paused, reached into her pocket, and pulled out a small folded paper. It was a photo one her cousin had sent her secretly. It was of that reunion, 2 years ago. The one where my father had stood in front of everyone, raised a glass, and said, To all my children, I am proud of every single one of you, except the one who's still finding himself. He never looked at me when he said it. He didn't have to. Everyone in the room knew. And Ava remembered. She held up the photo and said, This was the day I decided I didn't want to be claimed. I wanted to be chosen. And I already had someone who chose me. Not because I fit into the family mold, but because I didn't. She didn't mention my name, not once. And that made it louder. The next day, someone from a national art magazine reached out. They wanted to run a feature on Ava, including family history. She told them they could quote her but not chase a scandal. If they want the drama, she told the editor, they can call my grandfather. He throws great parties. The feature went live a week later. It didn't just talk about her art. It dissected her message. The quiet rebellion of color. The deliberate absence of faces in her portraits. As if the subject, one critic wrote, is no longer asking for recognition but releasing it. Ava's Instagram exploded. Collectors began demanding her. A private school asked her to guest teach. I watched it all from the sidelines, not as a manager, not as a father in the spotlight, but as the scaffolding she never had to lean on too long. But the real moment came 3 months later. We got invited to a dinner small, by invitation only. Ava would be the youngest person there by at least a decade. I told her we didn't need to go. But she looked at me and said, they'll be there. I didn't have to ask who they meant. My parents. My brothers. Maybe even my sister-in-law, the one who used to joke about Ava being our little art project. So we went. The venue was an old converted church, candles lining every inch of exposed brick. Ava wore navy, a deep tone that made her eyes look sharper. I wore black. I said nothing on the way over. She was quiet too, but not scared. Just sharpening something invisible. The evening flowed, wine courses, half-hearted applause. Until the moderator, some networking consultant, said there was an open floor for short tributes or messages. Ava stood up. She didn't raise a glass. She didn't even smile. I want to thank the people who shaped my art. Not through encouragement, but by silence. Not through love, but by lessons. The silence grew dense. Some of you know what it feels like to be seated at a table and still not feel invited. To be in the photo but cropped out of the frame. My mother's head turned slowly. My father's mouth opened and closed. But someone chose me, Ava continued. Not to rescue, but to believe. He didn't rewrite my story. He waited while I found my own pen. She looked at me then. Just for a second. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Then she sat down. I don't remember dessert. I remember my father rising, walking over, and placing a hand on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. Just stood there. Then he walked away. Maybe that was his apology. Or maybe it was just another performance. But that night, when Ava and I got home, she said something I'll never forget. I think that's the last time I'll ever have to explain myself. And she was right. Because from that point on, her art wasn't a rebuttal. It was a declaration. We started planning her move out west. Scholarships rolled in, gallery offers followed. But she chose a small university with open-air studios and no alumni board. She said she wanted to create without looking over her shoulder. She didn't need their name. She already had her own. When Ava left for California, she didn't cry, and neither did I. We stood at the edge of the airport drop-off lane like two people who understood that some departures weren't about distance, they were about definition. Her suitcase rolled lightly beside her, the zipper frayed on one corner, and inside were the tools of a new life: brushes, pigment, small canvases, and a letter I had written but never gave her. I watched her scan the terminal signs and then turned to me, no drama in her expression, just quiet certainty. I told her, "Go build what no one handed you." And she nodded once. That was it. That was all it needed to be. Back at home, the house didn't feel empty. It felt paused. Like it had been waiting for me to catch up to everything I'd deferred. I sat in my study, surrounded by shelves of unopened books and forgotten diplomas, and I finally reached into the old drawer where the family albums lived. They were wrapped in a discolored shopping bag, tape yellowed at the seams. I hadn't opened them since Ava was born. I flipped through birthdays where I wasn't centered, holidays where my face was turned, group shots where I was the one holding the camera. There were no accidents in those albums. Just edits, silent ones. But I didn't feel bitterness anymore. I felt confirmation. A cold kind of clarity that settles in your bones when you've spent your life hoping for warmth from a frozen room. Weeks later, Ava called. Her voice buzzed with something electric. She'd been offered an independent show at a gallery in San Francisco Small, but with a dedicated following. I want you there, she said. And, well, you're part of it. Sort of. That was all she offered, and I didn't press. When I arrived, the gallery greeted me with that distinct smell: paint, wood, varnish, and quiet ambition. Ava's pieces were nothing like the early ones I remembered. They were larger now, braver. There was movement in her colors, a kind of soft resistance. One painting in particular stopped me. It was a silhouette, two figures, faceless, walking toward a fogged horizon. A man and a child. No background, no identifiers. Just motion. The title plaque read, "The Unclaimed." I stood there longer than I probably should have, longer than anyone else did. Not out of vanity. Out of recognition. That was us and how we looked, but how we survived. During her talk, Ava addressed a small crowd, hands clasped loosely behind her back. I used to think family was about genetics. About who shows up in baby photos and who's listed on paper. But it's not. Family is who waits in the room with you when everyone else walks out. It's who stays when you stop pretending. There was a beat of silence so thick it became holy. Then the applause came out, raucous, not performative. Just true. That night, back at my hotel, I received a call from my oldest brother. The one who hadn't spoken to me since the reunion. His voice was subdued, as if time had dulled the edges he once threw at me like knives. Saw the gallery online, he said. You must be proud. I didn't respond. He continued. Dad's asking about you. And Ava. He says he wants to reconnect. I leaned against the window, looking out over the lights of the bay, soft against the dark. Why now? I asked. His pause was expected. Because everyone else is gone, I guess. And you're the only one who never asked for anything. That was the last thing he said before I ended the call, politely but with finality. Some chapters deserve to stay closed. Not out of spite, but self-preservation. Ava's exhibit was extended another month. She became the highest-selling new artist that gallery had hosted in 5 years. But fame didn't touch her. She still sent me voice notes about new ideas, still asked if I thought blue worked better than ochre in one corner of her canvas. She still asked what I thought. One morning, back home again, a small package arrived on my doorstep. It was wrapped simply, brown paper and string. Inside was a blank canvas and a single paintbrush. Taped to the back was a note. For the story you haven't painted yet. It sat untouched on my desk for 3 days. Then one night, after a dinner eaten in silence and a sky that refused to clear, I picked up the brush. I didn't try to paint a masterpiece. I didn't aim for metaphor. I just painted. Strokes that didn't need permission. Color that didn't apologize. Nothing fancy. Just mine. I'm not an artist. I'm not Ava. But I'm her father. That's the title I earn, not given, not inherited. Chosen. That's the masterpiece. There's a stillness that comes when you stop waiting for applause that was never meant for you. When you realize you were never the failure, they just lacked the lens to see what didn't fit inside their frame. And in that stillness, you can finally breathe. I haven't told Ava what I painted. I might. Or I might let that canvas remain ours in silence. Some truths don't need to be spoken aloud to be understood. But here's what I know now, without doubt, the man they once labeled, the loser, at a family reunion is the man whose daughter now paints in cities they can't afford to visit. That's not revenge. That's correction. That's not a twist. That's justice. You don't always get a moment of thunderous closure. Sometimes, revenge doesn't arrive as a public reckoning or an explosive finale. Sometimes, it looks like a quiet morning where you sip your coffee without resentment. where the silence no longer feels suffocating but earned. After the gallery closed, Ava and I took a walk along Ocean Beach. The wind pulled at her jacket, and she looped her arm through mine like she used to when she was little. "You okay?" she asked, and I nodded. She didn't ask if I was proud of her. She didn't need to. That's the difference between people who perform and people who see you. I used to think healing meant erasing what happened. That to move forward, I had to forget the sting of being overlooked, erased, humiliated in front of family who thought their love was a ladder I had to climb. But I don't need their approval anymore. I raised a child they never saw, in a house they never cared to visit, with values they never passed down. And she turned out radiant. There's power in that. Power in survival. Power in choosing to respond with purpose, not pettiness. My story wasn't their footnote, it was the part they never had the range to write. So if you've ever been labeled the disappointment, the outcast, the one who never measured up, remember this: sometimes being left out of their story is the only way to write your own. And when the day finally comes, when your silence becomes their echo, don't raise your voice. Raise your standard.